It is September 3rd, 1777. General Howe, Kniphausen, and Cornwallis have already left New York City and sailed south with Admiral Howe up into the Chesapeake Bay to the head of Elk in Maryland to begin a campaign in which was all orchestrated by Howe. It's the Philadelphia campaign. And as you see, it's a bit windy here today, so forgive me. But Burgoyne has already been well into his Saratoga campaign. And on September 3rd, 1777, the first shots rang at 8 a.m. in a little area in Delaware that began the Philadelphia campaign, led by Brigadier General Maxwell and militia from a few states, such as North Carolina, Virginia, New Jersey, and even Delaware and Pennsylvania, have banded together to annoy, under orders from General Washington, the Hessian and British forces that are on their way to the rebel patriot capital of Philadelphia. We are here today at a small, little-known battlefield right behind me. Not much of it is preserved, but they are working on it. And it's the only action to take place in Delaware. It's called the Battle of Cooch's Bridge. And that's why I bring you here today. Now, you must remember that Delaware is smack dab between New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Maryland, at least a part of it. But geographically speaking, from the Chesapeake, it is a straight shot to Philadelphia coming through Delaware. And that is why Howe is marching through Delaware. And at Aikman's Tavern is where the first shots are to be fired, beginning first engagement in Delaware. Now, all of this is mainly to annoy and harass General Howe and stave him off. That way he gets no rest while he gets to Philadelphia. In 8 days, we will have the great battle of Brandywine. And then we'll have the Battle of Paoli. And we'll also have up north the first Battle of Saratoga, the second Battle of Saratoga. But on September 3rd, we've already had the Saratoga campaign kick off. St. Leger was pretty much knocked off at Fort Stanwix. And Horatio Gates is preparing to defend Saratoga itself. Meanwhile, Washington was trying to figure out Howe's movements. First, Howe came up the Delaware, and he was going to land somewhere just outside of Philadelphia. But for reasons unknown, he sails back out and causes more delay and more time for Washington to react. So he's able to set up his army. Now, this is still the ragtag team that won at Princeton and Trenton twice, and they all signed on again. So Washington also had forts built along the Delaware, such as Mercer and Mifflin. Howe must have saw that and reconsidered, causing him to go to the Chesapeake. But that would delay him by so much. I think he wasted over a month, and in that time he lost horses, men, because they got scurvy, other types of illnesses that come along with cruising on a ship for so long. But Washington's men were able to just figure out his movements. And when he came from the Head of Elk, or Elk Head, from Maryland, he brought with him a force of 17,000 strong. And these were professional fighters. These were professional soldiers, as well as the Hessians. So Washington was prepared to defend Philadelphia as he figured out Howe's movements. And as I said, Cooch's Bridge was the opening battle of this Philadelphia campaign. Now, I have books with me here today to help get into more of the battle itself, but it's quite windy. I might take it to the car again because I've already lost my hat multiple times. But as I'm here, there's this impression in the ground, as you see here. That would be the Christina River. It looks more like a creek, at least from what I'm looking at. But yeah, well, let's get into it. So what I'm looking at here, this is a modern version of Cooch's Bridge, and that's going to be the Christina River, or the Christina Creek. It must have flowed differently along here. At least I would believe something of the sort to create this impression. But this would be the main battlefield of where the Battle of Cooch's Bridge took place. And I am looking roughly southwest, as you can see with the sun's position right about here. I don't want to have the camera look into it too much. But Patriot forces were all along here and all along that other side of the road where they fought and held off the British and Hessians. And most of them were sharpshooters because these were very trained and expert marksmen. And so the British and Hessians would come up this way, and there was two flanks. So we got the right flank was over on this side over here, roughly where that house was and barn. And then there was one over here to our left, which would be the left flank. Now, I know Howe personally came in to the battle to lead his men. I believe it was to rout the Patriots on one of the flanks, but they reached a marsh and they got pretty much bogged down and ended up just calling that part of the action off. And there wouldn't be many casualties, but there still were casualties to this battle. And as you can see here, looking in, that's the creek or the river, as you'd want to call it. But it doesn't come back much further. and this goes all the way down to that mill. The only reason why I'm not on that side is I am unsure if that is public or private land, and I am not looking to find out if I'm wrong. But I do know for a fact this was the battlefield. So that's why I'll be like stationed for the most part. It's just I know there's a lot of work going into preserving it. I read it online somewhere that they're working on preserving the battlefield. But so far this is where we'll be at today. So here I want to at least read this nice signpost describing the Battle of Cooch's Bridge. It says on 3rd September 1777, approximately 800 Americans forming the Special Corps of Brigadier General William Maxwell engaged several thousand Hessian and Ansbach Jaegers, which is light infantry, and British light infantry in the vicinity of Cooch's Bridge. Maxwell's newly formed corps was composed of Continentals from New Jersey, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Virginia, as well as volunteers from neighboring Pennsylvania and militia from Newcastle County. Men composing Maxwell's corps were supposed to be marksmen, and many were armed with rifles. For 1 week, under orders from General George Washington to provide every possible annoyance, Maxwell's corps had harassed and scouted the Crown Forces Army. Commanded by General Sir William Howe, the 17,000-man Crown Forces Army had landed at the head of Elk in late August, intent on advancing to capture the American capital, Philadelphia. Advancing along the Glasgow to Newark Road at about 9 o'clock in the morning, the Crown Forces advance guard marched into a well-prepared ambush. Elements of Maxwell's corps opened fire on the Hessian Jaegers from concealed positions along the road. Maxwell's orders were to engage the enemy, force them to deploy, fall back to another defensive position, and delay the enemy again. After the initial surprise, the rifle-armed Jaegers rallied and overran the first American position in hand-to-hand fighting. A second American line was encountered, stalling the Crown Forces' advance. Howe reinforced the Jaegers with 2 British light infantry battalions and ordered these troops to outflank the American position. The advance to the right led to a swampy area. So I was right. It was one of the flanks. It was on that side. Today's Sunset Lake, effectively removing 1 light infantry battalion from the action. The drive to the left towards Iron Hill was more successful in outflanking the Americans, forcing them to withdraw. Eventually, Maxwell's troops were forced to cross the Christina Creek. It's a creek. At Cooch's Bridge, when Crown Forces artillery came into play, and Howe ordered a charge. Outnumbered, outgunned, disorganized, and low on ammunition, the Americans withdrew towards Christiana, ending the battle. Casualties on both sides ranged from 30 to 40 dead and wounded. British pioneers buried at least 24 Americans on the field in unmarked graves. Among the American officers engaged in the battle were John Marshall, who was a future United States Chief Justice, Thomas Duff of Newport, Delaware, Alexander Martin, later governor of North Carolina, and Francis Gurney, founder of Dixon College. Following the battle, the Crown Forces occupied the area from Rittenhouse Park and Iron Hill to Aiken's Tavern, which is Glasgow. General Cornwallis established his headquarters at Cooch's house, or at the Cooch House. The Crown Forces encamped in the area for 5 days, and on 8th of September marched north through Newark. On the 11th of September 1777, the 2 armies met again at the Brandywine Battle of Brandywine. The local grist mills of Thomas Cooch and Andrew Fisher were used to provide flour to the Crown's troops, and the Cooch mill was destroyed when the Crown forces departed. Sometimes known as the Battle of Iron Hill by American participants, battle was the opening engagement in the Philadelphia campaign of 1777. And that was researched by Wade P. Katz, RPA. And the signs were brought to us by the Pencander Heritage Area Association. So, and they're here at Newark, Delaware. So that's from the sign here. All right. So if I'm not mistaken, looking at this map here, we're roughly right here on the map. So we're on the left flank area of the Battle of Cooch's Bridge. Meanwhile, the right flank would have been on that right side. So the marshy area was over here. So Iron Hill is right across us to the right. And the lake is going to be, I believe, on that side. Or on this side, because that would have been his right. So that would have been our left. So facing further south. And that's around 8 a.m. where the opening shots were right here with the light infantry company. And then Maxwell retreats to the Christina Bridge, which is Cooch's Bridge. So at 10 a.m., the light infantry support of the Jaegers charge. And there's an action over there. And then we have action here at Cooch's Bridge where we're at. And Jaegers charge Maxwell with hunting swords. And okay, so to our left, yep, that's where the swamp is. So the swamp is roughly over in that position right there. So yep, and then Iron Hill is a little past in this vicinity. So that's about 10 a.m. That's not even a quarter of a mile distance from one another where the actions happened. So that's good to put a little bit more of a pin on everything where it's all at. But let's get to the books. So I have a couple of books with me here today, and the one I really want to share first is by Michael C. Harris, Brandywine, a military history of the battle that lost Philadelphia but saved America, September 11th, 1777, right here. Now, it says here on page 134, it says, when Maxwell moved into the area, his men not only occupied Iron Hill, but also extended themselves about a mile south along the road leading to Aiken's Tavern. The terrain was studded with ambush positions. At the intersection of the King's Highway, the road to Wilmington, with the road to Aiken's Tavern just west of Cooch's Bridge, stood the Cooch grist mill, which is down that way. And on a small rise nearby stood the family home of Thomas Cooch. The family, however, was long gone, having fled to Pennsylvania to escape the dangers of warfare. Howe's army began moving on the morning of September 3rd. The general decided to cut loose from the fleet, always a risky logistical move. However, the lethargic voyage meant a few supplies remained on the ships. General Howe informed his brother he would allow him 10 days to reach Newcastle, Delaware, before initiating a major action against Washington's army. The time would allow the army to continue gathering supplies and to outmaneuver Washington into Pennsylvania. 2 infantry battalions under James Grant would remain at head of Elk until the last of the British ships left the Elk River. As historian John Reed noted, Howe could have easily crossed the Maryland-Delaware Peninsula and there awaited the fleet, but this would have had the same effect as their original landing on the Delaware and would have little explained to London the excessively long voyage into the Chesapeake. So, in an effort to outflank the American positions on Iron Hill, the British moved to the south of that position and headed toward Aiken's Tavern, crossing the Mason-Dixon line into what originally had been the 3 lower counties of Pennsylvania. The British easily outflanked Maxwell's light infantry. The route Howe chose also allowed General Knyphausen to rejoin the main army after forging around Cecil Courthouse. The Germans' detached column returned with horses, cattle, and other livestock much needed by the army. When the army reached Aiken's Tavern, Howe made the structure his headquarters. Johann Ewald was ordered to take 6 mounted Jaegers and ride north toward Iron Hill to determine whether the Americans had reacted to the British movement. They had not gone far when an American detachment ambushed the 7 men. A volley of gunfire rippled from behind a hedge, killing or wounding all 6 of Ewald's mounted Jaegers. Ewald's normally calm horse was wounded in the belly and reared so high several times that I expected it would throw me, recorded the Hessian officer, who had somehow escaped the hail of lead balls. Ewald called forward the foot Jaegers, still some distance behind him. A running 2-mile fight developed as some 400 Jaegers pushed north towards Cooch's mill and the bridge spanning Christiana Creek. Foreshadowing what would occur 8 days later along the Brandywine, Maxwell, through a series of small ambushes carried out by his novice light infantry, slowed the British advance. Iron Hill towered above the surrounding countryside as the Jaegers approached the mill, the high ground studded with Maxwell's Continentals. Alerted to the fighting, Howe rode to the front to observe the unfolding situation. Once he understood what was transpiring, he ordered the Jaegers to assault the hill. The charge was sounded, and the enemy was attacked so severely and with such spirit by the Jaegers, reported Ewald, that we became masters of the mountain after a 7-hour engagement. The protracted combat included a 2-front fight. While some of Maxwell's men were indeed upon Iron Hill, others had run across Cooch's bridge and were fighting from the opposite side of Christiana Creek. Late in the engagement, Howe pushed forward additional element to support the exhausted Jaegers. The 1st Light Infantry Battalion attempted to come up on the left flank, but was slowed by swampy ground. That's what we were talking about over here. I'm looking at the gristmill as I talk. The 1st Light Infantry attempted to come up on the left flank, but was slowed by the swampy ground. The inability of the Light Infantry to negotiate the swamp, explained Montresor, prevented this little-spirited affair from becoming so decisive. The 2nd Light Infantry Battalion arrived on the Jaegers' right, followed by the British Grenadiers. It was the arrival of these fresh troops that allowed the Jaegers to dash across the bridge and drive the Americans away from Christiana Creek. The 2 bodies of troops that faced each other that September day consisted of men who intended to take advantage of cover and pick off their opponents. The result was an unexpected and difficult slog for the Jaegers, who recorded the pesky opposition in their corps journal. They were driven back into another woods with considerable effort, admitted the chronicler. Here they defended themselves obstinately. Maxwell's light infantry had indeed fought obstinately, but exhausted their ammunition doing so. Ludwig von Wurm, commander of the Jaegers, recalled that when the Americans ran out of powder and shot, we went after them with the sword and made them flee. The withdrawal, or flight, of Maxwell's command over Christiana Bridge was so disorganized that great numbers threw down their arms and blankets and left several dead and wounded behind on the ground. Despite its length, the combat resulted in fewer than 100 casualties combined for both armies. Howe wrote, "They went on ye most covered country you ever saw with more, I think, than their usual spirit," reported the general. Their perfidy or fervor was so great that ye grenadiers, who were as willing to have had their share in ye business as could be wished, could hardly keep up to support them in a run. So this morning the enemy came out with considerable force and 3 pieces of artillery against our light advance corps, he reported, and after some pretty smart skirmishing obliged them to retreat, being far inferior in number and without cannon. The engagement proved to Washington's satisfaction that Maxwell's light infantry could serve the same purpose Morgan's men had for the army. And the engagement at Cooch's Bridge was not a major affair and had no effect on the outcome of the campaign of the war. However, by brushing aside the Americans, Howe eliminated the threat against the new British camp at Aiken's Tavern and cleared Iron Hill of enemy troops. I have another book here called A Guide to the Battles of the American Revolution by Theodore P. Savas and J. David Dameron. And here on page 116, it said Brigadier General William Maxwell was assigned to lead the Patriot advance guard. His light infantry forces observed and harassed the British as they moved northward. The series of running skirmishes culminated in a well-planned ambush by Maxwell's 700 men at Cooch's Bridge on September 3rd. Using hit-and-run tactics, Americans fought well until forced back, and when it became obvious the British were pressing toward Philadelphia, Washington recalled Maxwell. And then that would lead up to Battle of Brandywine. And it's very brief. Like most of these books just have a brief writing of the action here at Cooch's Bridge, and sadly it's overlooked, and it really shouldn't be. And I have this big book. I somehow can't remember how I obtained it. It's the last one I have. I knew would probably have it. It's called The War of the Revolution by Christopher Ward. It is really thick. Really, really thick. I don't know how many pages this actually is. It's well over probably 900. It just reaches 900 at least, it looks. 896. Yeah, that is a pretty chunky book. And this is paperback too. But here it says on (339). Along this unpleasant road at about 9 o'clock in the morning, the van of the column, Hessian and Anspach Jägers under Lieutenant Colonel Ludwig von Wurm, followed by British light infantry with 2 small field pieces, was making its way, cautiously no doubt, when it met a sudden fire from Maxwell's men posted among the trees by the roadside. Wurm formed his men, and there was a hot fire from both sides. The field pieces were brought into play. A detachment of Hessians shifted to the woods and attacked Maxwell's right flank. Wurm charged with the bayonet. The Americans retreated up the road, took a new position under cover, and renewed their fire. Again they were driven back to another stand. The British light infantry entered the engagement. The Americans again retreated, keeping up a running fight. At one point, a body of riflemen formed a kind of ambuscade and gave the British several close, well-directed fires. An attempt at getting into the American rear failed because an unpassable swamp intervened, which prevented this spirited little affair becoming so decisive as it might have been. But Maxwell's men were now pretty well disorganized. Their retreat became a flight, and they were pursued for some distance, but finally made their way to the main army on the White Clay Creek. The casualties were perhaps 30 killed on the American side and about as many killed or wounded on the other. So, and then it just goes on about Aiken's Tavern and Iron Hill. But in all the instances I've read and everything else, the Americans fought obstinately, which is full of like valor and ferociously, and these are just 700 of them. So to be outnumbered by tenfold, what was it, 700 against 17,000 in a sense for the whole army? That's that's like a lot. That's not even 10 times. That's like almost 20 times their size. Because if you think about it, it's probably like 20 times 700 is, I think, probably 14,000. roughly, I think. Don't hold me to it. It's just quick maths right there. Yeah, that does, in a sense, already take some courage. And for an engagement like this, just to hold off the British, I mean, from what I can see here, the terrain isn't favorable to the British. But since the Continentals ran out of ammo and everything else, and since they had a lot of since a lot of them had rifles, it took a lot longer to load their rifles, because it was like more or less, I think it was like a shot per minute, or 1 round per minute, because of the rifling inside the barrel and stuff like that. And I don't think those rifles had bayonets, or were able to hold bayonets. So I can understand why they were overwhelmed, even from that part. But yeah, that's for that part. For the knowledgeable part, through the books of Cooch's Bridge, that's what we have, and it's sad. But I just wanted to bring it to everyone else's attention of its importance. So on we go. I'm just did some driving around, and the Cooch house is pretty much right past that barn over there. It's closed. I took a picture of it, and I figured out Iron Hill, that's right here, that it says, is actually that imposing form right about here. That's what I'm playing at, or that's what I'm guessing, because it's the most commanding looking feature in the vicinity of Cooch's Bridge. So when we look at the battle here at 8 a.m., we have Iron Hill here, and we have Gray's Hill right here. We only have Maxwell right before Iron Hill, and down this old road to the what is that? To Glasgow, the old Cooch's Bridge Road. So, and we have him here, and then he moves back to the Christina Bridge. So yeah, that helps put things in perspective, at least for me, because if you're looking at this, if you look all around here, so we have Cooch's Bridge right here, and the men fell back to this position because the right was right over there by that commanding hill. I mean, that's a pretty big hill. I would consider that a mountain, but what would I know? That's going to be Iron Hill over there, because there's no other commanding area that would impose a threat to this campaign except for that feature in the terrain, that commanding bit of earth, because nothing else is higher. And I could roughly see maybe the other hill just through those trees, unless that's a continuation of Iron Hill, which I doubt it, because I just drove down this road and there was a Cooch's Bridge monument. So I just wanted to come back and try to put a little bit more perspective on there. So yeah, I can see why Maxwell tried to hold that position, or at least keep the Hessians and the British from, easily obtaining it. So the Continentals would retreat back here from the woods, because there's some woods scattered along here that I'm sure they definitely fought through. So all those guerrilla tactics and everything, being marksmen, that's what they did, and they retreated back to this position from the south and moved north fight along here one last time, make like a stand until they ran out of ammo. So I'm sure they use this as some kind of protection, because there's some artwork showing that they made some kind of entrenchment of the sort, or they used some kind of natural barrier, and I believe this would be the case. And they fought along here. And as I said, I don't know if that's private property. When I drove back down, it definitely looked like some private property. So I'm glad I'm just staying along here and respecting boundaries, because that's the one thing you got to do when you're doing these battlefields, is you want to respect property owners. You don't want to go on a private property and get yourself in a whole bunch of trouble. So what they did was they defended over here along that hill. It's a little too dangerous to park alongside the road to navigate and to show. And then that's the right flank over here, or the right flank of Maxwell down the road there, straight to the right. Meanwhile, Maxwell's left flank, they were over here, and they retreated back this way, and they both grouped and regrouped all along here, and fought off the British. And then at the end of it all, they just went back down this road here to Christina, to the Christina Bridge, or Christiana Bridge. But no, that's Cooch's Bridge right there, and it's pretty remarkable, you know, how 700 men were brave enough to fend off and hold back and annoy and harass. That's all they did, was annoy and harass, just to keep the British and Hessians on their toes. You know, that can wear an army down a little bit if they don't get any kind of rest or relaxation. You know, a little bit of R&R, because if you can keep an army a little bit, you know, not from being able to rest, you might be able to not necessarily demoralize them, but you know, you can do something to them to help out in the long run. It's playing the long game here, pretty much. And yeah, there's a field over there past what this was here, and we can walk to it. I'll stay along this side till I can't no more, because that's also part of the battlefield. But I just can't go much further. I don't want to risk anything. And see how high up that is? And that's just to get into that little crevice. But then this is the grist mill down here. I'm not sure if it's still in operation, but I can zoom in to get a better close-up of it. Don't mean to do wide angle. Just drive down here or walk down here. And these are probably the woods too where the action took place. I'm just not looking to fall in. So looks like I could probably have driven down here, but why not walk and get some exercise? See what's this here. See a little bit. Okay. That's a big old ditch looking in there. All right, I'm glad I kind of walked down this way. Gotta walk a bit sideways, but for the most part, this is the rest of the field from where we were down there. It's always good to get the best angles in the terrain. And even here, the terrain, you can see like the top of the tree here. So I wonder how far down that dives off into. There's some kind of structure, I think, right there. No, that's just an opening. But yep. So this is where Howe would have come from, and where that lake would be at, or he'd be bogged down from being able to attack Maxwell's left and outflank him, because they were along this side here. And as you see, as I said, there's no other commanding place that would be able to be called a hill. So, yep. One little fact about the Battle of Cooch's Bridge was it was the first battle engagement where the Stars and Stripes were used in battle. The famous Betsy Ross flag, it was used for the first time here at Cooch's Bridge. I just figured I'd give you that little tidbit as well, because I found that fascinating. So, right here is where that historical event happened with our nation's flag. So, yeah. So, what would eventually happen on September 11th, one of the first September 11th of this country's history, you're going to have the Battle of Brandywine. Washington's going to suffer a defeat there. He's able to save the army, which is pretty much what he wants to do every battle. But it's like the first major engagement of the war that is actually the longest. The next one's going to become of Monmouth, I believe. But Brandywine's going to be the pretty much end of the year battle. He's going to have Brandywine suffered a loss there while retreating to find an encampment for the winter. We're going to come across the battle or massacre of Paoli, and up north, Burgoyne is going to suffer his defeat at Saratoga, and this will have the British fully surrender to Horatio Gates in New York on October 17th. So a little bit more than a month and 2 weeks from this battle here is where we see this victory come from the Northern Department. But it's here at Cooch's Bridge where the Philadelphia campaign kicks off as its first battle. And this campaign is going to last roughly a month or so, because eventually Burgoyne's going to take Philadelphia. I mean, not Burgoyne. Howe is going to take Philadelphia, because Howe was supposed to meet Burgoyne in New York at Albany, but the Saratoga campaign was doomed to begin with. Howe wanted to attack the capital and demoralize the patriot cause. And as it turned out, Congress just moved. I believe they moved to Baltimore or Lancaster or somewhere in Pennsylvania, something along the sorts. I believe it was somewhere in Pennsylvania because they took over Delaware. It must have been like maybe Reading or Lancaster or something of the sort. Somewhere in Pennsylvania, pretty much. And taking over Philadelphia was just wasteful. Had Howe listened to the orders and followed the orders and stuck with the plan with Burgoyne, who knows what could have happened, but I don't play what ifs. Howe messed up coming down. Like, this whole campaign was butchered. But Howe wouldn't know that. Washington wouldn't know that. And this would be the beginning of the end for the British on the American continent and the United States of America. And Cooch's Bridge shows the British and Hessians the resolve of the American will and what the Americans are willing to do to defend their country and their home. And it's thanks to these brave men to kick it off for this Philadelphia campaign. 40 losses, that doesn't seem like much, but it is. It's still lives lost for a cause. It's still husbands and fathers and brothers and sons giving their lives in the name of freedom, independence, and justice, pursuit of happiness, and the rights of all men, and divine rights, and the cause of the American Revolution. Now, these battles should not be overlooked. And being here, I know, helps with that. There shouldn't be any battle that gets overlooked. There shouldn't be anything that gets overlooked in this sense. Men who give their lives for a cause. It's humbling. It's sombering. It's tragic. That's what battlefields are. They're tragic. Even this small little, not as preserved battlefield. There's still unmarked graves for these Continentals. I don't even know where they're at. They're here somewhere along the field. Will they ever get to them? I don't know. Maybe in my lifetime, if they haven't. But Cooch's Bridge is the first engagement of the Philadelphia campaign, and it should not be overlooked. And it's the only action to ever take place in Delaware. Out of the entire Revolutionary War, Delaware has soil where it was fought on. And it's not too far from home. It's not too far from Philadelphia, the capital at the time. But at the time, in September of 1777, all was too real. War came close to the capital. It came to the capital. Just outside of it, and the British took over. The British won. You can only imagine what it was like to fight here, to go up against an army that completely outnumbered you. 700 to 17,000? It's insane. But it happened. And we should never forget it. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you in the next video. Have a good one.